Good morning. So I hope everybody's having a good day. I hope the notification goes out. I have been playing around with some things and I've been doing my homework. So I wanted to share some things that I've put together with you guys. Hopefully the notification goes out though. So I'm going to start off with a couple videos that I put together. So
the small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country. The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other.
We're now 2 weeks into
the small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country. The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other.
We're now 2 weeks into the siege of the city of Ottawa. I call it a siege because that's what it is. It's an illegal occupation.
This is the age-old elites taking on the people.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford responded to the blockades, responded to the protests by invoking, and this is a big decision, a state of emergency in the province of Ontario.
The small fringe minority
on the details. Until then, I know that we are here to stay.
The small fringe minority holding unacceptable views. Small fringe minority have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a fringe minority, holding unacceptable views, small fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Over the past many months and years now, Canadians have stepped up to protect each other, to protect our frontline workers, to protect our elders, to protect our young people, to protect people like truckers who are putting food on our grocery store shelves. It's important to underline that close to 90% of truckers in this country are vaccinated, like close to 90% of Canadians. Fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Small fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Small fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Small fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Small fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Truckers have stepped up to protect the freedoms and the rights of Canadians. Truckers have stepped up to protect the freedoms and the rights of Canadians to get back to the things we love to do. Fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Small fringe minority, holding unacceptable views. Small fringe minority.
Well, hello. So, okay, let me make sure that can you guys hear me? I want to make sure my mic isn't muted now. I've been playing around with some settings, and I want to make sure that, going into the inquiry of the Emergencies Act, it's very important to remind everyone, the events that took place and the reason why this particular cause happens to mean so much to me and why it's so kind of shocking to Canadians, what happened. So, I'm going to be making more of these types of videos as it gets closer to the date of the inquiry starting, because again, there's a lot of things that have happened that need to be documented, that will be addressed, that will come out in the weeks, months, and years to come. So I want to take a trip back in time. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in high school, I had better things to do with my time. And sitting in history class was not one of my favorite things to do. My history teacher was very boring. He was very monotone. He was a really huge drinker, actually, and kind of a funny guy, but, very like melancholy kind of guy. Like you couldn't tell if he was like happy or sad. And it was kind of like that tongue-in-cheek kind of comedy. So yeah, the reason why I wanted to play this video, well, let me play the video first and then I'll explain why. So here it is.
In the spring of 1970, the FLQ is getting ready to strike again. Lise Balsay and Paul Rose rent a very ordinary little house south of Montreal.
We showed up as a couple, Paul and Lise Blais. We were looking for an isolated house in an area where the neighbors weren't too nosy. We were going to use it as our base of operations.
The country will be plunged into its worst crisis since the Second World War. It begins in early October. The FLQ kidnaps British diplomat James Cross from his house in Montreal. The kidnappers threaten to kill Cross unless the government releases 23 prison inmates they describe as political prisoners.
I said that you people should stop calling them political prisoners. They're not political prisoners. They're outlaws. They're criminal prisoners. They're not political prisoners. And they're bandits. That's why they're in jail.
5 days later, another blow. The cell led by Paul Rose kidnaps Quebec's Minister of Labour, Pierre Laporte. Now there's a real sense of crisis. The FLQ seems well organized. The police forces powerless. Laporte is detained in the little house Lise Balsay and Paul Rose rented a few months before.
La station radiophonique CKAC de Montréal vient de recevoir un troisième communiqué émis par le Fonds de libération du Québec, particulièrement par la cellule de financement Chénier. Donc un communiqué accompagné d'une lettre adressée de la main de M. Pierre Laporte adressée à M. Bourassa.
The kidnapping puts tremendous pressure on the young Quebec premier. Pierre Laporte is his senior cabinet minister. Bourassa turns to Ottawa for help. The federal government sends in the army to protect politicians and important buildings. Canada has never seen anything like this before. For Pierre Trudeau, a lifelong champion of individual rights, this is a defining moment.
Sir, what is it with all these men with guns around here?
Well, there's a lot of bleeding hearts around who just don't like to see people with helmets and guns. All I can say is go on and bleed, but it's more important to keep law and order in this society than to be worried about weak-kneed people who don't like the looks of a soldier.
At any cost? At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that?
Well, just watch me.
The FLQ has support. 3,000 people crowd into the Paul Sauvé arena. The FLQ's lawyer, Robert Lemieux, fires them up.
On va s'organiser intelligemment, on va choisir nos terrains et nous vaincrons!
Bourassa and Montreal Mayor Jean Drapeau now believe they are facing an apprehended insurrection. They ask the federal government to act immediately.
The government, following an analysis of the facts, including the requests of the government of Quebec and of the City of Montreal for urgent action, decided to proclaim the War Measures Act. It did so at 4 a.m. this morning, in order to permit the full weight of government to be brought quickly to bear on all those persons advocating or practicing violence as a means of achieving political ends.
This law has never been invoked in peacetime. It suspends basic civil rights and liberties. It allows police searches and arrests without warrants, and prolonged detentions without charges and without the right to see a lawyer. Hundreds of raids and arrests begin immediately. In the middle of the night, police show up at the home of singer Pauline Julien.
They didn't ask us anything. I refused to stay in the living room during their search. I told them, "You are in my house. I'm going with you everywhere." They didn't behave that badly. They weren't as brutal as I had heard they were elsewhere.
She and her companion, leftist journalist Gérald Gaudin, are arrested.
Why was I in jail? If only they had questioned me, I might have had an inkling. What had I said? What had I written or published?
Pauline Julien and many other women are locked up in Montreal's Tonguay prison. All contact with the outside world is forbidden. A warden offers some help.
She told us, I can make phone calls for you, but I can't say who I am, nor where you are. All I can do is ask those people whose name you give me to take care of your cats or your children.
Only Tommy Douglas and his new Democratic Party openly oppose the War Measures Act.
And when you give these kind of powers to local authorities, you no longer know what use or abuse they're going to make of those powers. This is what troubles us.
But during the early days, Canadians overwhelmingly support the federal government, even in Quebec, where almost all of the arrests occur. On the night of October 17th, an FLQ communique leads police to a car parked near Saint-Hubert Airport.
The 13-day drama that Canadians have been living is over. The Minister of Labour and Immigration of the province of Quebec, Pierre Laporte, was found dead tonight in the trunk of a car found near Saint-Hubert Airport.
It is the first assassination of a Canadian politician since the murder of Thomas D'Arcy McGee 102 years earlier. Lise Balset did not take part in the kidnappings. She is in the lower St. Lawrence region when she and a group of FLQ sympathizers are arrested.
The radio was on, and somewhere between Matane and Quebec City, I heard the bulletin that they had found Pierre Laporte's body. I felt bad and, at the same time, a bit weird. At that time, we were revolutionaries, so for me, Laporte's death was an execution, not a murder.
Tuesday, October 20th is one of the darkest days in Montreal's long history. In less than 3 weeks, a whole political culture has changed. Until then, politicians in Canada went about with no protection. Now they become less accessible. There will be a greater distance between the elected and the governed. Pierre Laporte's killers are arrested a few months later. The police will find and free James Cross after 60 days of captivity. It is the end of the FLQ. Pauline Julien and Gérald Gaudin are detained for 8 days, then released without charge. It will be the same for more than 440 others. Pierre Trudeau and Robert Bourassa will express no regret for having invoked the War Measures Act. But later, they will concede that there were excesses.
Okay, so that was the War Measures Act. Now it's called the Emergencies Act. And the reason why I wanted to show that is because I wanted to start kind of educating myself on the last time that this was invoked prior to this year. So it was invoked in World War I, World War II, and then the FLQ crisis, which I just showed you. So the reason why I think it's important to address these things is because, you know, I'd like to point out some all too clear similarities, in my opinion. The first one is that, you know, this was Pierre Elliott Trudeau, which is Justin Trudeau's father. They were both liberal, not that that matters, but the reason why I'm showing you this is because this goes back to, I believe, when Quebec wanted to separate. And they had political prisoners, and from what I understand, there were several bombings in mailboxes and stuff happening back just prior to them implementing what was formerly known as the War Measures Act. And then obviously you heard what it led up to. It led up to the murder of one, politician and the abduction of another. There was people that they're calling, what did they call them? What the hell did they call them? Empathizers, sympathizers. And I just want to point out that, like, that's why I started showing footage from our time in Ottawa. And this is what our current leader is comparing us to. And it's insulting on so many levels. I mean, not just the verbal names that he's called us, and the division that he's caused amongst people, like I've talked about before. But like, there was people that were in jail that could not get bail hearings and bail reviews. You heard what happens. They basically have free reign to do whatever they want, and boy did they ever. They illegally seized people's bank accounts based on hearsay. And this has come out so far with like the preliminary to the inquiry. So what happened was, during the convoy, either those that were like, organizers, lead participants in it, or people that were donating to originally what was a GoFundMe that raised over $10 million, that was supposed to be donated, from from everyone around the world that supported this cause. And it was supposed to be distributed to the truckers. And so the government essentially shut that GoFundMe down. And so they went to an American company called Give, Send, Go, and it was a Christian-based platform. It was located in the US, that is technically, obviously out of Canada's jurisdiction. And they were able to shut that down. To take it a step further, they also shut down the accounts of people that donated, and they were going on TV saying, these were threats, and that these were like, foreign investors supporting acts of terrorism. And I am not sure. I believe there's still a controversy over that money. I think it's still held in like escrow right now until they determine, what happens during the Emergencies Act inquiry that's coming up. It was scheduled to start on September something, 13th, 19th, something like that. But now, sorry, I think it was the 19th. But now it's been postponed because the guy, that is running this commission-based inquiry, he has to have surgery. So it's been put on hold. And then there's talk about that. And, is it, a strategy of theirs to try and, not have this happen and all this stuff come out in the open? But regardless, it's we're going to eventually get our day, right? So this is essentially what they're comparing us to, is terrorists, is people that were trying to overthrow the government. There was some videos made from people that, like, it was a grassroots movement. It started out as truckers fighting mandates because they were having trouble getting across the borders with foods and, goods and services. And it just grew into like everybody supporting them. And it was, I don't know, like, I mean, obviously I wasn't, an organizer or anything like that. I was just a participant because, quite honestly, I was sick of living, in hell. Like, you can't go here. You need a vax pass. You have to wear a mask. You can't do this. You can't do that. You gotta, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people's human rights were stepped on during this act. And it's very historical because it's something that I've never seen in my lifetime. And you guys know how I feel about it. I've been pretty vocal about my opinion about it. So, I mean, but it's going to be interesting what comes up in the days to come, during the inquiry, and to see what happens as a result. But, when they implemented the War Measures Act back in the October crisis, they call it, or the FLQ crisis, that was warranted. Like, people one guy died, one was abducted. Like, they wanted, exchange of like 23 political prisoners or something of that nature. They helped these guys get to Cuba. Like, there's just so many things that, like, but I believe, obviously, that was before my lifetime, just before, thank God. But it's not something that I lived firsthand and that directly affected my life. Like, it was something that you heard about in history, and quite honestly, that's why I wasn't there. Because even listening to like that 9 minutes was like, ugh. But just how smug he is, and like I get that same feeling when I see his son, ironically. But yeah, that's the reason why a lot of us are upset. And I don't know if that message has been correctly conveyed to people that, only follow mainstream media. And I just want people to get a clear picture of like exactly what happened. Like, there was people that actually, one of the guys, he was held in jail, I think, for like 150 days. I think his bank accounts, the last I heard, were still frozen. Like, just, I mean, so many things have happened. And there was a big controversy. Okay, so before the Emergencies Act was implemented on February 15th, there was blockade. So the Ottawa convoy was going on. That was the biggest thing, right? And then at the Windsor border crossing, they had that blocked off. They had the Coutts, Alberta, and I believe it's Montana border crossing blocked off. And then there was another thing, I can't remember, something else. It was going on everywhere. But before they implemented the act, all of those things had been cleared. So the whole basis on why, they had to trample all over our Charter of Human Rights, like the biggest condition as to why they were able to supposedly implement this act was because there was no other means necessary to end this. And it was like disrupting trade, and the countries were losing like millions of dollars, billions of dollars in trade, with the US. And that's what they were going on TV saying. And they painted this picture like it was all done in unison, by the same people, and it was like, foreign officers are funding these activities. And no, it was, people were pissed off, they were fed up, they wanted to be heard, and they weren't. And when they seen what was going on in Ottawa, people maybe couldn't geographically be there or whatever. I don't know how things came to all come together at that time, but it just did. And we had no reason to believe otherwise. And they were going on TV saying that we're terrorists and this and that. And like, they had investors like wanting to pull their money out of Canada. Like, it was a big deal. Like, there's millions of dollars in lawsuits going on right now with everybody. Like, everybody is suing the city of Ottawa. That's why this is a big deal. Like, it's going to be a huge deal. It's not something we've ever seen, and it will be talked about, remembered, laughed at, and documented in history books. And in my niece's future, they're going to be reading about this one day. And when they do, I want to make sure that they don't get the watered down, politically correct version of propaganda, because that's all it would be. That's why, I documented my time in Ottawa. That's why I made videos and did lives and things like that, so I could always remember in real time exactly the way it was. And hearing, educated people, doctors, lawyers, the guy who wrote the Charter of Rights, the last living member to sign the Charter of Rights, Brian Peckford, is suing Ottawa because of their violation of our rights. Because in order to implement the act, they have to demonstrably prove that it was the only option left. And it was supposed to go through the House, then the Senate, and then it was to be implemented and invoked if it got that far. It went through the House, and before it could go through the vote of the Senate, he had already implemented the act, went Gestapo on everyone's ass, and then stopped it before they could even get it to the table in the Senate. So it's very shady. He knows what he did. That's why the police chief officer, in my opinion, in Ottawa stepped down, because he wasn't cooperating or something to that effect. That's my opinion only, but something happened there because, in the middle of this supposed insurrection and this giant terrorist threat, the police commissioner steps down. Oh, okay. So why don't you just put who you want in that position? Because obviously, during this time, they tried to get an injunction to, stop the people and remove the trucks from Parliament Hill in Ottawa and the surrounding areas, all the while working with the organizers of this event in full cooperation from the time they left the West Coast till the time they reached Ottawa and beyond. Like through the entire thing, they had communication. The only one who didn't want to have communication was the one who was scared into getting COVID into his bunker, into the private jet, onto the island so he could just be safe. Because he can't deal with controversy, because you see what his dad's like, right? Like smug and, oh, you want to push me? See how far I'll go. Gee, I wonder why. And these things need to be looked at and they need to be considered and they need to be documented, because like these are going to be important facts. I'm telling you right now, they're huge. And all of these things are going to be looked at under a huge magnifying glass for the entire world to see. And personally, I can't wait. So, that's what every single Canadian is waiting on right now. And, to see what happens to this bozo in Saskatchewan, but that's a different issue. But, it was the best time of my life I had in Ottawa the first time I was there. It was the best party. It was like one giant street party with speeches and bouncy castles and feeding the homeless and cleaning the monuments off in front of Parliament Hill and guarding the memorial for the veterans and the Terry Fox Monument. They were feeding the homeless. The crime rates were down. Like there was so many positive things, but the media chose to not highlight any of that. They were very on the opposite side of it. At that time, like it really kind of changed the culture of the way that it was looked at. And it took time and people were still angry about it. But like it changed a lot of people's lives. And that's the reason why most of us care the way that we do, because it affected our lives in one way or another, at least one way. And for some of us, even more. So, I just want to, I'm not going to make this long and drawn out. So I'm going to do like, shorter videos kind of every day and just keep the facts, fresh at the forefront of your mind, because, coming into the next few weeks ahead, it's going to be important to remember all of these things, and one other thing I would like to point out is that, they're trying to pass censorship bills at the same time. They're trying to pass a bill, C11, that I won't even be able to talk about this on social media anymore without being censored, which has already been happening anyways. I've lost multiple YouTube channels. I've been in Facebook jail more times than I can count without bail, and it's just not something that's going away. It's only getting worse. And, I just want to point out for the people in the back that you don't censor the truth. You don't hide the truth. You don't run from the truth. You don't go into a virtually witness protection program over the truth. You don't avoid it. You confront it. You don't censor it. You don't ban it. You don't try to silence it unless you're afraid of what that might be. So, on that note, I just want to show this fucking bozo again.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
And if you don't do it, we're going to force you into submission. We're going to take away all your rights. We're going to threaten your job, your family, your friends, your livelihood, and you're going to do it anyways. and you're going to do it with our permission or without. And they're starting it again. There's already, you know, media posts going around saying he's making threats about the winter and how we're at such a low, you know, I don't know. Some people are on like their 5th and 6th shots. I think, I don't even know, but most of us gave up. You know what I mean? If we even took it at all. Some people were lucky to not have to take it. I'm very jealous of you people. As my prime minister would say, you people, I don't know how long we're going to tolerate you anyway. So yeah, sorry that it's a little bit boring for those of you who this didn't necessarily affect, but you know, like I said, I just want to point out the inconsistencies. His father may have been warranted to invoke the act during 1970, but the son was strictly power tripping, acting like a little toddler, ran to safety when he wasn't even in jeopardy anyways because he was scared of the big bad truckers. So stay tuned. There's going to be lots more to come. It's a long way till October 13th, but thanks for watching, you guys. Bye.